There's a promise buried inside the words full-time job. Nobody says it out loud anymore, but it used to be simple. Work full-time and you can take care of yourself. That was the deal. Show up 5 days a week, do your 40 hours, and the basics are covered. A roof, food, the lights on. Not luxury, just a life that doesn't lose money. For millions of people working full-time right now, that promise quietly stopped being true. And when they say it out loud, that they work full-time and still can't get ahead, the usual answer is that they must be doing something wrong. Bad with money, lazy, making excuses. So today we're not going to argue about that. We're going to measure it. But not in dollars, because dollars hide the problem. We're going to measure it in the one thing nobody can print more of: hours. Here's the idea, and everything comes back to it. Money is just stored time. Every dollar you earn costs you a piece of your life to get. So instead of asking what your rent costs, we're going to ask how many hours of your life your rent actually eats. And when you convert a whole life into hours, something shows up that dollars keep hidden. There are only so many hours, and the bills started asking for more than exist. Let's set the rules. One person working full-time, not part-time, not gig work on the side, a real 40-hour week. We'll use a wage near the bottom half of full-time workers, around $15 an hour, because half of all workers earn less than the middle, and this is the half the promise broke for first. Average city, and the same bare survival budget we've built before. Nothing extra anywhere. Now the first conversion, and it stings. You earn $15 an hour, but you do not keep $15 an hour. Tax, Social Security, and Medicare take their piece before you see a cent. So your real take-home is closer to $12 for every hour you actually work. Hold that number, $12 an hour, in your hand. That is the true exchange rate between an hour of your life and money. So let's start converting your life into hours. Rent first. A basic place, call it $1,300 a month in an average city. At $12 an hour take home, that rent costs you about 108 hours of work every month. Look at that. Just to keep a roof over your head, you hand over 108 hours of your one life, every single month, before you have eaten a thing. 108 hours. That's not a number, so let's make it real. A full-time month is about 173 working hours, so rent alone eats roughly the first 13 working days of every month. You clock in on the first, and you don't earn a single hour for yourself until somewhere around the 13th. Everything before that belongs to the landlord. Now let's keep going. Food. A careful grocery budget for one, cooking at home, is around $340 a month. At $12 an hour, that's another 28 hours of work. Utilities, power, and water and gas, say 180, another 15 hours. Just rent, food, and the lights now costs you about 151 hours a month, and we have not touched anything else yet. Then the car, because in most of America there is no way to reach a job without one. All in, payment, fuel, insurance, repairs, a car runs around $500 a month even on the cheaper end. That's another 42 hours of your life every month just to get to the place that pays you. Add it up. Rent, food, utilities, and the car already cost about 193 hours a month. Stop there for a second, because we just passed something important. A full-time month is only about 173 hours. Rent, food, utilities, and a car already cost 193. You have already spent 20 more hours than a full-time job even contains, and we still have not paid for a phone, insurance, or a single other thing a human being needs. Let's finish the list anyway. Phone and internet, you cannot get or keep a job without them. About 130 a month, 11 hours. Health insurance, if your job doesn't cover it, easily 200, another 17 hours. And everything else, soap, clothes, a haircut, one unexpected thing, call it 200, 17 more hours. The bare month is now well past 230 hours. So here is the whole thing in one picture. A basic no-frills life for one person costs somewhere around 240 hours of work a month. And a full-time job gives you about 173, 240 needed, 173 available. You are short by nearly 70 hours of work every single month before you have done anything but survive. 70 hours. That is almost 2 full extra work weeks hiding inside every single month that a full-time job does not pay for. This is the part nobody names. When someone says they work full-time and still can't make it, this is what they mean, whether they've done the math or not. The job is real, the hours are real, the gap is real, and it has to be filled from somewhere. So where does it come from? There are only 3 places, and none of them are good. The first is more hours, a second job, overtime, a weekend shift. You fill the 70-hour gap by working 70 more hours. But a week only has so many hours in it, and you still have to sleep. So this option has a hard ceiling, and you hit it fast. Let's actually look at that ceiling, because this is where hours beats dollars as a way to see it. A week has 168 hours total. Take out 56 for sleep, 8 a night. Take out time to commute, cook, clean, exist. What's left that you could physically sell is real, but it is not unlimited. You cannot work your way out of the gap forever, because you will run out of week before you run out of bills. That is the wall that money hides, and hours reveal. In dollars, it always looks like you could just earn a bit more. In hours, you can see the hard edge. There is a fixed number of hours in a day, 24, and in a week, 168, and no amount of effort adds a single one. When a life costs more hours than you physically have to give, no budgeting tip on earth closes that gap. So if you can't fill the gap with hours, the second place it comes from is debt. You put the missing 70 hours on a credit card. And this is the cruelest turn in the whole thing, because debt is borrowed against your future hours at interest. You are not just short this month. You are selling next month's hours too, and paying extra for the privilege. The gap doesn't close, it compounds. And the third place the gap comes from is simply going without. You skip the doctor, you don't fix the tooth, you eat worse, you cancel the one thing you looked forward to. This is the invisible one, because it never shows up as a missed payment. It shows up as a life quietly getting smaller. And from the outside, it just looks like someone managing, when really they are absorbing the gap with their own well-being. Now, some of you are doing this math for your own life and getting a different answer, a better one. And it's worth being clear about why. If you earn well above that $15, the exchange rate changes completely. At $30 an hour take-home, that same life costs half the hours, and the gap closes or disappears. This video is not about you, and that's exactly the point we're building to. Because the number of hours a life costs is not the same for everyone, and it never was. The person earning $15 an hour and the person earning $30 are living in two different versions of time. The same rent, the same groceries, the same tank of gas costs one of them twice as many hours of their life as the other. They are handing over completely different amounts of the only thing they can't get back. And that is the real inequality hiding underneath the wage gap. It was never only about money, it's about time. The lower your wage, the more hours each ordinary thing costs you, which means the less of your own life you have left over, which means less time to rest, to retrain, to look for something better, which keeps the wage low. The math doesn't just take your money, it takes the time you'd need to escape it. So let's go back to the promise we started with. Work full-time, and you can take care of yourself. For a lot of the 20th century, for a lot of people, that was roughly true. A single full-time income could cover a basic life with hours to spare. The job gave you more hours than the life required. That surplus was the whole point. It was what full-time meant. So what changed? The same thing we keep finding in every one of these videos. The lines drifted apart. Wages, measured in real buying power, rose slowly, and for the bottom half, barely at all. Meanwhile, the cost of the basics, rent most of all, rose much faster. Every year, a life cost a few more hours of work than the year before, and a full-time job did not get any longer. In the early 1980s, a full-time worker on a low wage could cover rent on a modest place with roughly 1 week of work a month. Today, in a lot of the country, that same rent takes closer to 2 weeks. The rent didn't just get more expensive, it got more expensive measured in your life. It doubled in hours, and a month still only has the same number of hours it always did. That is the quiet math of it. Nobody voted to break the promise. There was no single day it stopped being true. It just eroded, 1 year of rent rising faster than wages, until the surplus that full-time used to guarantee turned into a deficit. The job that used to leave you hours to spare now leaves you dozens of hours short, and it happened so slowly that we started blaming the people caught inside it. And that blame is the last thing worth taking apart, because it's the most common response and the most wrong. When a full-time worker can't cover a basic life, the instinct is to say they should budget better. But look at what we built. There is no budgeting tip that finds 70 hours in a month that only has 173. You cannot discipline your way out of an arithmetic problem. The coffee, the takeout, the small stuff people love to point at, it's real, but it's rounding error against a 70-hour gap. Cutting a $5 habit saves you maybe 20 minutes of work a month against a gap measured in weeks. The story that people are broke because they're careless survives because it's comforting. It means the system is fine and the person is broken. The hours say the opposite. There's also a specific trap that catches people right at the edge of this. Earn a little too much, and you lose access to help, food assistance, rent support, healthcare subsidies, but the help disappears before the wage is high enough to cover the life on its own. So there's a stretch where earning an extra $1 an hour can leave you worse off because you lose more in support than you gain in pay. In hours, that trap is brutal. You work more, you earn more, and the amount of life you can actually afford goes down. It is one of the few places where selling more of your time buys you less. And people inside that stretch are often accused of not trying, when the truth is the math actively punishes them for trying. The gap isn't a personal failing. In that zone, it's practically a policy. So what do you actually do with all of this? First, if this is you, understand that the number is real and it is not your fault. You are not bad at money. You are running a life that costs more hours than your job contains, and no amount of shame changes an arithmetic problem. Naming it correctly is not an excuse. It's the first honest thing anyone has said about your situation in a long time. Second, understand where the real leverage is, because it's not where people tell you. The advice is always to cut spending, but the spending isn't the problem. The exchange rate is. The two things that actually move the number are the hours a life costs, which mostly means rent, and what an hour of your time is worth, which means your wage or your skills. Everything else is noise against those two. That's why the moves that actually change this are big and structural, not small and personal. A cheaper place to live, even a harder move, can give you back 30 or 40 hours a month. A skill that lifts your wage by a few dollars an hour changes the exchange rate on your entire life at once. Those are the levers. They're hard, but they're the only two that touch the actual math. And to be completely fair, the promise isn't dead everywhere for everyone. In lower-cost parts of the country, on the better end of wages, full-time can still cover a basic life with room to breathe. The surplus still exists in places. The point was never that it's gone for all. It's that for a large and growing share of full-time workers, it quietly flipped from surplus to deficit, and we never updated the story. Because the story still says full-time equals fine. That's what we tell teenagers: get a full-time job and you'll be able to support yourself. For a lot of them, walking into the exact jobs that built the middle class, that sentence is now just not true, and nobody warned them. They did the thing they were told to do, and the math on the other side had changed while the advice stayed the same. This is why the feeling is so disorienting for so many people. They aren't failing at the plan. They followed the plan exactly. Full-time job, no wild spending, no obvious mistakes, and still short at the end of every month. The confusion isn't a sign they did something wrong. It's the completely reasonable response to being handed a promise that the arithmetic stopped honoring. So the next time you hear that people who work full-time and still struggle just need to try harder, you don't need to argue about character. You can just ask one question: how many hours does a basic life cost where they are? And how many hours does their job actually give them? If the first number is bigger than the second, no amount of trying fixes it, because you cannot work hours that don't exist. Measure it in dollars and it stays an argument, one person's opinion against another's. Measure it in hours and it becomes arithmetic. And arithmetic doesn't care how anyone feels about it. A life costs what it costs in hours. A job gives what it gives in hours. And when the first outgrows the second, being broke isn't a character flaw. It's just subtraction, playing out in someone's real life. So here's the number to remember. For a full-time worker on the lower half of wages, a basic life now costs somewhere around 240 hours a month, while the job provides about 173. That is not a small gap. That is nearly 2 extra work weeks that don't exist, demanded by every single month, from people who are already working every hour their job will give them. That gap is the thing still being broke is actually made of. Not bad choices, not weak character, a shortfall of hours built into the exchange rate between a life and a wage for a huge share of people who are doing exactly what they were told would be enough. The promise was that full-time would cover it. For millions of people, the hours simply no longer add up. A day has 24 hours. A week has 168. A full-time job gives you a fixed slice of that, and no effort adds a minute. When the cost of an ordinary life outgrows the hours you're able to sell, working full-time and still being broke stops being a paradox and becomes a math problem, one that millions of people are quietly solving with the only thing they have left to spend: their own time.